Free at last, but an American soldier just released by the Taliban could be facing serious charges. Is prayer the answer to peace in the Middle East? Leaders from Palestine and Israel are set to meet and pray with Pope Francis. Protecting the vulnerable. It's the aim of a new effort by the UK and the Vatican. And America is a melting pot for people all over the world. How one sport helps immigrants make the transition. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 3rd, 2014. Good evening. With our EWTN News Nightly team in Washington, D.C., I'm Brian Patrick. We begin tonight with news now. The president is defending his controversial Taliban prisoner swap for a captive soldier. Jason Calvi has been covering this story for us and joins us now from Capitol Hill. Jason?
Brian, the controversy is brewing here on Capitol Hill. Even though the president is traveling in Europe, he can't escape this controversy. It involves Sergeant Bergdahl, who after 5 years in Taliban captivity was freed in exchange for 5 Taliban fighters. And today, the president responded to this controversy.
We don't leave our men or women in uniform behind. And that dates back to the earliest days of our revolution.
The president speaking in Poland this morning. But back home this afternoon, Senate Republicans slammed the president for releasing 5 Taliban fighters in exchange for Bergdahl.
These people have dedicated their lives to destroying us. It is a mistake, and it is putting the lives of American servicemen and women at risk.
A law requires that Congress be notified 30 days before a prisoner leaves Guantanamo Bay. Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee say the Pentagon only called within 5 hours of the switch. But the president said today,
we have consulted with Congress for quite some time about the possibility that we might need to execute a prisoner exchange in order to recover Sergeant Bergdahl. We saw an opportunity. We were concerned about Sergeant Bergdahl's health.
House Speaker John Boehner says they were briefed more than 2 years ago, and they raised serious concerns about a possible swap. Bergdahl could face more challenges when he returns home. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says the Army could still investigate if Bergdahl deserted his post. He was captured by insurgents in 2009. But President Obama adds,
whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop.
A 2010 Pentagon investigation found that Bergdahl did indeed walk away from his post. Now, we've also learned today that the White House apologized to top senators on the Hill today, apologizing for not notifying them ahead of time of this exchange. Brian?
All right, our Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you, Jason. The United States has been moving toward a smaller military presence in Europe, but President Obama is now signaling a significant departure from that trend. In Poland, Obama said the U.S. is preparing to boost its military presence in Europe at a cost of up to $1 billion. The announcement comes as tensions in the region simmer over Russia's aggressive actions in Ukraine.
Given the situation in Ukraine right now, we've also increased our American presence. We've begun rotating additional ground troops and F-16 aircraft into Poland. And this is going to help our forces train together. It's going to help our forces support NATO air missions.
His stop in Poland is the beginning of a 3-country swing through Europe for the U.S. president. He'll meet tomorrow with Ukraine's newly elected president. Obama and Russia's Vladimir Putin are likely to cross paths later this week in France. They're both attending Friday's commemoration of the 70th anniversary of D-Day. President Obama said today it's possible for the U.S. to rebuild trust with Putin, but it would take time. Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A Jesuit priest working with refugees in Afghanistan has been kidnapped. The Jesuit Refugee Service says its country director, Father Alexis Prem Kumar, is abducted by 6 gunmen in western Afghanistan Monday. The 47-year-old Indian national was taken from a school that he was visiting. Authorities are working with district elders to try to mediate his release. A federal appeals court is temporarily blocking an Arizona law that lays out strict standards for abortion medications. The appeals court judges say that they can't find a rational basis for the law. The law would ban women from taking common abortion drugs after their 7th week of pregnancy. Well, $2.5 billion, that's how much was spent on the 2012 presidential campaigns. But some Democratic senators are proposing changing our Constitution to limit campaign spending. 41 Senate Democrats and 2 independents are proposing a constitutional amendment. It would give Congress and the states the power to regulate how much money is raised and spent in political elections.
The Constitution that everybody loves to talk about doesn't give corporations a vote, and it doesn't give dollar bills a right to vote.
Congress shall make no law. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
To change the Constitution, 2/3 of the Senate and House would have to back the measure. Then the amendment would need to be ratified by 3/4 of state legislatures, so it's almost certain to fail. There aren't enough votes in the Senate, and the Republican-controlled House is unlikely to even vote on it. But, of course, we are likely to hear more about this during the fall election season. Now, a bizarre plot to kill a young girl in Wisconsin. Prosecutors say 2 12-year-olds spent months planning to kill a friend. It was all to please a mythological creature they called Slender Man. Police say the girls convinced their friend to go with them to a park where they pushed her down and stabbed her several times. She survived the attack. Prosecutors have charged the suspects as adults, but their lawyers are likely to fight that move. In fact, one of the girl's lawyers is asking for the girl to be transferred to a mental facility. We're getting some new insight tonight into the moments in Maui after a pilot discovered there was a teen stowaway near the landing gear on his plane. This happened back in April. Listen to this.
We have a little gate delay here. A guy is claiming to have stowed away in the landing gear from San Jose to Maui.
You need any assistance with that, or you guys got it?
No, plenty of security here and mechanics. It's all good. We're just waiting for parents to go.
FBI officials say the teen didn't remember the flight. They think he may have passed out due to the extreme cold and lack of oxygen at a cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. It's a big night for politicians in several states, in fact 8. Some hope to hang on to their jobs beyond January, while others are trying to unseat incumbents. Voters are getting their last-minute primary ballots in this evening in 8 states, but it's the Republican primaries in Mississippi and Iowa that are attracting most of the attention tonight. 6th-term Mississippi Senator Thad Cochran is fighting off challenger Chris McDaniel. Meanwhile, Joni Ernst is leading the polls in Iowa. Well, there will be no election in Spain, even though the man in charge there is stepping down. King Juan Carlos is abdicating the throne. His son, Crown Prince Felipe, will take over the transition, or rather, that transition could happen as early as this month. We're getting our first look at the king and his son since that announcement. This is from a military ceremony. The future king can't expect to live happily ever after, however. Several members of the royal family have been accused of financial scandals involving government money. This despite the fact that Spain is still trying to recover from the recession. The church's umbrella group for humanitarian aid is teaming up with the United Kingdom to fight a very serious issue. Today at Vatican Radio headquarters in Rome, the British ambassador to the Holy See and the head of Caritas Internationalis took part in this live radio discussion on ending sexual violence in conflicts such as war. The largest ever summit on this issue will be held next week in London, but today's discussion got the talk started early.
The aim is very simple. It's to end sexual violence in conflict, to turn the huge political will that there is to do something about it into practical action on the ground.
The summit will be co-chaired by the British Foreign Secretary William Hague and actress and UN Special Envoy Angelina Jolie. Pope Francis welcomes the presidents of Israel and Palestine to the Vatican this Sunday. The Holy Father says their joint prayer is critical to promoting peace in the Middle East. Our Wyatt Goolsby has our report tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, Pope Francis has made it clear this meeting on Sunday is not about formal diplomacy. He says he and the 2 presidents will meet with the sole focus of praying together, but the Holy Father may indirectly end up playing a diplomatic role after a tense week between Israel and the new Palestinian government. This morning, Rami Hamdallah, the newly appointed Palestinian Prime Minister, chaired the first meeting of the Palestinian Unity Government in the West Bank. The Unity Government, formed yesterday, is meant to end a rift that broke out when the Islamist militant group Hamas seized power in Gaza in 2007.
We call on the international community to immediately recognize the government and continue to support the Palestinian political leadership efforts to enable the government to face all political challenges, especially the Israeli policies.
And the challenges are already surfacing. The United States say they will work with the new government, but Israel's prime minister says he's deeply troubled by that. The biggest problem for him, the new Palestinian government's support of Hamas, which he says has killed innocent people.
So all those who genuinely seek peace must reject President Abbas's embrace of Hamas. And most especially, I think the United States must make it absolutely clear to the Palestinian president that his pact with Hamas, the terrorist organization that seeks Israel's liquidation, is simply unacceptable.
Both the conflict and the Pope's trip to the Holy Land last week prompted Sunday's meeting. This video of the Holy Father praying at Bethlehem's separation barrier, head on concrete, has become an iconic moment. Francis made it a point throughout his visit to extend friendship to both the Israeli and the Palestinian side. And in all the places he traveled, he prayed for friendship among Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
Rispettiamoci e amiamoci.
May we respect and love one another like brothers and sisters. May we learn to understand the suffering of others. May no one abuse the name of God through violence. Let us work together for justice and peace.
Pope Francis also said during his trip that building peace is hard, but he says prayers and simple gestures of good faith can help to do it. Brian?
All right, Wyatt, of course, we'll cover this very important story for you. The U.S. Supreme Court released rulings on a few cases this week, including Bond versus the United States. The High Court unanimously decided an international chemical weapons treaty does not apply to a jilted lover. When Carol Ann Bond learned her husband fathered her best friend's child, prosecutors say she sought revenge. She's a lab technician and allegedly stole chemicals to harm the woman. Instead of turning the case to state prosecutors, the federal grand jury indicted Bond on 2 counts of possessing and using a chemical weapon. Carrie Severino is with us, Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network. In your opinion, did the High Court get this one right?
You know, they got the result right, but unfortunately most of the justices got it right for the wrong reason. 6 of the justices basically said they rewrote the statute in order to avoid the constitutional question. What happened here is Congress made a law, and it didn't base it on its constitutional powers. It said they based it on its authority under a treaty. That's a very dangerous kind of precedent to make, to say if we sign a treaty, we now can make any kind of law we want. It gets you out from under having to obey the Constitution's limited powers. The Chief Justice and 5 other justices said, we'll just interpret the law differently. We'll kind of edit it ourselves to make it okay. 3 other justices, Justice Thomas Scalia and Alito, said, no, this is just an unconstitutional law. You can't rewrite it. That's Congress's job. You have to say it like it is.
Yeah, I thought we had 3 branches of government: legislative, judicial, and administrative. So the dangers, talk a little bit about the dangers of judicial interpretation of law.
Right, so this is a case where we can all agree this is a situation that belongs more in daytime TV than the federal courts. They got that right. But if they're doing it in an inappropriate way, it means they could do other things that way too. So if you're interpreting a law to get out from under a constitutional argument now, you could do it in a law we don't agree with later. So this is what the Chief Justice did in the Obamacare case. He just rewrote the law to avoid a constitutional problem. If they're willing to do it today, they will be doing it in other ways as well. That means this is how we get decisions like Roe v. Wade. This is how marriage is being changed across the country, is judges who are interpreting laws according to how they wish they had been written, not actually what the law in its text says. And it just highlights the importance of judicial nominations, particularly going into the 2016 elections, because it's crucial to have judges who are going to faithfully interpret the law rather than bringing their own opinions in.
All right, so this is a much broader issue than this one particular case.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, with the Judicial Crisis Network, Carrie Severino, thanks for joining us tonight. Coming up.
All we are saying to the government is that just wake up and do what you're supposed to do.
Nigerians protest their government's inaction to free captive schoolgirls. And rising tensions. Throngs of Syrian refugees overwhelm nearby Lebanon. Elections in Syria just wrapped up. Many voters were sealing their ballots with their own blood. It's a sign of patriotism and allegiance to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. You're watching EWTN News Nightly on Tuesday, June 3rd. I'm Brian Patrick. And the election in Syria has to be extended, or had to be, for 5 hours because of what they called a high turnout at the ballot box. Despite the number of people voting, though, many Western governments are calling the election nothing more than a show. They say it's almost guaranteed that President Assad will remain in office for another 7 years. Part of the reason is votes were only cast in government-controlled areas. Of course, Syria is in the middle of a bloody civil war. Though a source on the ground tells News Nightly the elections are free and fair. And other candidates say simply having an election is progress.
This election shows the victory we had in Syria. I'm very proud of being Syrian, and I'm very proud of giving my voice in a very democratic way. I think Syria now is the new one.
We're still waiting for the official results of the election tonight. Well, many Syrians have fled the civil war, seeking refuge in neighboring Lebanon, straining that country's resources. These young Syrians have fled their homeland with their families. Pope Francis has repeatedly called on the faithful to pray for these refugees. 1,090,000 have so far registered in Lebanon, but the real number is estimated to be almost double that. There are no formal refugee camps here. The government won't allow them because they fear they could become permanent.
So we see a country that's struggling to cope with a huge refugee influx and yet has not yet received the support that it needs in order to continue.
The UN Refugee Agency helps with tarps and sanitation, but Nanette Kelly says the infrastructure is overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of refugees.
You see it in the area of health services, for example, where clinics are really overburdened. You see it in water and sanitation services that are starting to buckle under the strain. And you also see it in some tensions that are beginning to surface.
Due to these tensions, the UN agency is trying to improve infrastructure, hospitals and schools within Lebanon, and is providing generators and waste removal. Still, conditions are poor, but many are grateful to be here away from the violence in their home country. The UN says it is working with 60 agencies, along with the Lebanese government, to continue to provide emergency relief to the refugees. And we need to continue to be praying for them. In Nigeria, tensions between police and protesters are reaching a flashpoint. Police have banned protest against the Nigerian government. Protesters want the government to do more for the hundreds of schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram in April. But protesters are still taking to the streets anyway. A police commissioner says he doesn't want people gathering because the rallies have degenerated and have become a public safety threat. But one woman says that's not what this is about.
If they don't want me to protest, all they can simply do is to bring back the girls now and alive.
272 of the nearly 300 kidnapped girls are still held captive by those terrorists. The U.S. Supreme Court will not hear the appeal of a group of neighbors trying to block the construction of a mosque in Tennessee. The Becket Fund for Religious Liberty argued that the mosque was being held to different legal standards than a Christian church. Lawyers say this violates the federal Constitution and civil rights laws. We have Daniel Blomberg of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty with us this evening. Daniel, break down the case for us. What was this group trying to accomplish in Tennessee, and how did the High Court react to that?
Well, what the group was trying to do was engage in religious persecution against Muslims. In America, we don't do that. In America, we don't allow the government to come in and force a religious group out of a community just because of their religious identity. And it was particularly egregious in this case because this religious group, this Muslim congregation, had been in Murfreesboro, Tennessee for 30 years. They're a part of that community. Like many churches, they participated in food pantries and homeless shelters. They helped with disaster relief efforts. But after that time, like many churches around the country, they grew a little too big for their congregation, in fact, for their building. In fact, they grew much too big. They were in a building that was about the size of a medium-sized home. They had 250 families. So at services, people were spilling out into the hallways, into the parking lots. They couldn't participate. And so, like 20 other Christian churches before them, they went and applied to the zoning commission, and they got a building permit to build a new building that could house their congregation. And that's when things got ugly. Arson, vandalism, a bomb threat that led to a federal indictment. That's what they had to face. And then legal harassment. When this anti-Muslim group filed a lawsuit and said, hey, you didn't give us sufficient notice about this thing that you were going to do, this building that you were going to
to start. And so we get to force you to go back to square one.
Well, the Becket Fund certainly has defended a number of Christian organizations, Catholic organizations. I know that you're defending EWTN in its case against HHS. So here you are defending this Islamic community about their mosque. So when one religion is faced with persecution, how can that spill over to all religions and their affiliated groups?
Well, you know, religious freedom isn't a zero-sum game. When we defend religious liberty for one religious group, we're really defending it for every religious group. So when we protected the mosque, we protected that mosque on Friday, the synagogue on Saturday, and the church on Sunday. When we refuse to defend religious liberty for certain types of groups, in effect, we're undermining it for everyone.
Yeah. Very, very important. Daniel Blomberg with the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. Thank you for being with us on EWTN.
Thank you.
Up next, Soccer Mania. The World Cup's about to hit Rio. We have a preview tonight. And chanting campers. That's right, a camp for Gregorian chant. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and soccer fans from all over the world are gearing up for the World Cup. It kicks off in less than 10 days in Rio. The U.S. national team got a spirited send-off recently in New York's Times Square, and even though the U.S. is not a soccer powerhouse, players don't see that as a disadvantage.
I think you've seen teams down the years who have been able to kind of navigate through the group stages and get to the later stages of a World Cup. You don't have to be experienced. Sometimes experience is a hindrance. You know, you have that baggage and you have that worry of expectations.
The American team leaves at the end of the week for Brazil. This will be their 7th straight World Cup appearance. Well, it's not exactly World Cup soccer, but another sport is gaining popularity here in the U.S., and Susie Pinto has that story.
In some New York City parks, you are now as likely to see a cricket match as you are a baseball game. The sport's popularity is growing so fast in the city, there aren't enough fields to accommodate all the matches.
I never thought that cricket would grow as much as it's grown within the last 10 years.
A surge in immigrants from South Asia and the West Indies has led to schools full of kids who didn't grow up playing traditional American sports. Now in fields next to empty baseball diamonds, New York City public school cricket teams fight to make the City League playoffs. For some, like Akash Chowdhury, cricket helped soften a difficult transition.
Playing cricket in America makes me remember my back country, like Bangladesh, because I used to play cricket all the time. So I really don't miss my country right now like that because I play cricket here.
When he came to the U.S. over 30 years ago, John Aaron could never have imagined New York City would be building cricket grounds. The fields are still mostly filled with immigrants, but Aaron thinks that's about to change.
When soccer first started here, people said, oh, it's not going to go anywhere. American football is going to be the thing, and soccer would not replace American football. Well, soccer hasn't replaced American football, but it has certainly taken off now, hasn't it? It's attracting international teams coming into play. Cricket can do the same thing.
Members of a new adult traveling league hope to build a fan base for domestic cricket. But Aaron thinks the future of the sport in the U.S. will be built on the enthusiasm of its young players. Susie Pinto, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Susie. It is summertime and kids are swimming, hiking, boating, and fishing at camp. In Southern California, kids are getting a unique opportunity. They're learning the ancient music of the church, chant.
The idea for Chant Camp came to me that I wanted more children to be able to experience Gregorian chant. I kind of wanted to cast the net wide.
We started the Chant Camp to help promote Gregorian chant. You know, children, I think, approach the chant with a pure heart. And so they're actually, I think, a little easier to be taught. They just enjoy singing.
Chant Camp would never happen without kids and teens who really want to make something beautiful for God.
Even if no one on earth hears me, heaven hears me.
Beautiful. And you can get information or register through St. Anne Parish in San Diego. Thanks for joining us tonight and every night. We're back tomorrow. Meanwhile, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and you can catch us again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.